Hello, my name is Tim Shoebridge. In this video I'm going to be taking a brief look, a tiny glimpse at this rather beautiful and desirable and, dare I say, expensive synthesizer behind me. It's the Syntrx by Erica Synths. Now I haven't had very much time with this synth at all. I haven't had the time to create music examples and sound examples and that kind of thing. I will explain why in a little while. So I've had the Syntrx for half a day, it arrived this morning in fact, and it's got to go back, unfortunately. It's got a problem. The joystick control gets stuck, it doesn't move freely, so that's a really, really big shame. And the thing is that at this point in time, even though I've just received it, having spent 5 or 6 hours with it, I am sort of like swaying as to whether I actually ask for a replacement or just ask for my money back. I actually don't know at this point in time. But let's see how I feel at the end of the video. Now, I've had a fascination with the Syntrx for many months, a sort of a growing desire to own one, and I really don't know why, because every video that I've watched on it, whether it's a review or just playing some sounds with it, I just don't like those sounds, the sounds that I'm hearing. Sounds like this. Right, so now I'm sitting in front of the synth and I've been patching it for a few hours. I realise now why, with all of those videos that I've watched about the Syntrx, I haven't liked the sound coming out of it. And that's because if you set the levels, the controls to sort of like normal values like you'd expect on any other synth, what you're actually doing is introducing an awful lot of drive into the analog circuitry, into the filter specifically, and that drive has its uses definitely, but it taints the sound, it taints the character of the oscillators and of the filter in a way that you might not realize, and I'll try and show you what I mean. So here I have got a very, very simple patch. I'm just patching oscillators 1 and 2 through to the filter, and then the filter into the output channel. And I've selected one waveform with both of these. I've got the square wave of oscillator number 2. I've got the sawtooth of oscillator number 1. So they're going through the filter, and the filter frequency is turned right down at the moment. It sounds like this if I turn it up. Should have tuned them first, shouldn't I? But anyway, that's it with no resonance. Let's put the resonance up to 50%, so number 5 there. No real difference. Let's crank it round to number 8. Hardly any difference at all. Let's whack it up all the way to maximum. Maximum resonance. Tiniest amount of resonance going on there. Now you'll see where I've got these levels on these oscillators. They're at, they're 50% round. They're at number 5, and I'll at least be putting them to number 5, if not higher, on most synthesizers, and that's what I get. And what I get is a filter that just is very, very boring, lackluster. It really doesn't do very much. But actually, if you listen very carefully, down here, it's kind of gyrating. It's actually distorting down there. And the reason for this is because we're driving the analog signal through it quite heavily, just with these settings of 50% on the gain on both of these oscillators. If I turn these oscillators all the way down to just number 1, out of, it goes around to 10, so it goes from 0 to 10. I'm just going to set them to number 1. I'm obviously going to have to turn up the whole gain of the synth now to compensate. But now, if we listen to the filter, that's with no resonance. Let's go up to 50%. Sounds a lot nicer. Let's go up to 7. 8. 9. And let's do maximum. So that's a much more sort of typical sort of filter response with resonance, and it's because we're no longer driving it heavily. And in order to do that, I'm having to set these values really, really low, down to 1. Even if I start to put them up to about 2, I'll start to be driving the filter circuit. So you can see there how you really need to understand the synth very well and understand what's going on with the filter to get the best out of it, because obviously there's going to be times when you want to drive it hard and get that kind of distorted sound, but if you want a sort of a more traditional response to resonance with the filter, then you have to turn these gains really a lot down. So here's just one more example, just to emphasize that distortion effect that's there if you drive the oscillators too much into the filter at what looks like normal kind of levels. I'm playing the Syntrx duophonically. I'm using both of the CV ins from my keyboard here, and if I set the oscillators so the gain is really low, like I did before, just 1, and let's turn up the volume here. So you can hear the 2 notes, it's very musical. Let's now, I'm going to have to turn things down a little bit. Let's turn up these oscillators to 50%. I'm not touching the filter. 50%. And let's hear what that sounds like. Totally different, right? There's all sorts of harmonics in that distortion, which is why you're getting those beating effects. It's very, very different sound. So, you know, the filter in this Syntrx reminds me a lot of the filter that Behringer have put into their 2500 range of modules, Eurorack modules. It's got that same kind of quality. If you don't drive it, you get this beautiful resonance, and it's quite a delicate and kind of traditional sounding filter. But as soon as you drive it, you get very, very different qualities, and that whole resonance response just falls away completely. That's what you have here with the Syntrx, but it really doesn't take very much at all before you get into that sort of like overdrive mode. Right, so we'll come on to the modulation capabilities of the Syntrx in a minute, but first I just want to talk about the reverb that's in this synth. Now it's a physical reverb, it's a spring reverb tank inside here, and I have to say it's a very, very, very sensitive spring reverb, and I think that's by design. I've got a patch here with just one patch point, one thing blinking. I've got the reverb output going to channel 1 so that we can actually hear the reverb unit itself. I'm not patching any audio at all going into the reverb at all. So when I turn up this mix, we're just hearing the noise of the reverb. And it's noisy. I mean, it's really noisy. That's sort of 100% wet. Can we hear that? I hope we can hear that. It's really, really noisy, which in itself is a problem. But in terms of the sensitivity, so I'll just turn it down to say 50% and just tap the unit. Hopefully we can hear that. It's really sensitive, more sensitive than any other synth actually that I've owned that's got a real spring tank reverb inside it. I guess that's partly due to the, you know, the physical size of the synth and the metal construction, but I also think it's by design. And I say it's by design because we've got these two speakers here, and the idea is that yes, you can hear the synth, you can play the synth through those speakers, so you don't need headphones or any other amplification. But by design, the audio that's generated by these speakers will actually resonate the spring inside the reverb tank, and you will get a feedback loop generated through these speakers, and apparently that's by design. If I can demonstrate that to you, I'll turn on these speakers, and let's just turn up that mix again. And there we go. I mean, even there, barely turning the reverb on, we get this long sustained feedback, which is going to get louder and louder and louder and louder. I mean, I don't understand why you'd want feedback like that. I mean, it's not tunable in any way. It's at the frequency that it is. There's nothing you can do about it. You've either got it or you haven't, and why would you want it? But anyway, it's by design that you have it. That for me makes using the reverb unit with the speakers, well, it's totally unusable. I mean, I can't use these speakers with that reverb turned up at all, because I start to get that sound. And in fact, I have to say that here in my studio, just with sort of normal audio levels coming out of my main speakers here behind me, as I'm playing the synth, if I've got any reverb there at all, I'll start to get feedback as well. So I'm actually finding that the reverb, I can't use it at all unless I'm using headphones. I mean, if you didn't have a synthesizer, then I can understand you might want to make that tone, but you've got 3 oscillators to make that exact same noise if you want to, so I don't understand. But never mind, let's move on. Let's look at the modulation capabilities. Okay, let's take a look at the modulation capabilities of the Syntrx. They are quite limited, if I'm completely honest, which I know is like starting off on a negative. We don't have a dedicated LFO, or we do, because we have oscillator number 3, and oscillator number 3 is specifically designed to be an LFO, really. Although it is dual use, you can use it as a regular oscillator along with oscillators 1 and 2, but the frequency range that it goes through is sort of shifted down towards the low end. I'll just give you an example of that. So if we listen to the square wave of oscillator number 2 first, this is how low that one goes. It could be a fast LFO if you wanted it to be, but it's not very slow at all, is it? And then by comparison, let's listen to oscillator number 3. Right down at the bottom here. Gripping viewing, isn't it? Okay, as you can see, it's really much slower. So this is our LFO, basically, oscillator number 3. And we've got two waveforms. We've got a square wave that we were hearing then, and we do have a triangle as well. You do have a shape control, so you can morph those shapes, which is cool. It's really quite closely linked to the sample and hold circuit. So it's basically driving the sample and hold circuit, in as much as if you enable the sample and hold circuit, then you're kind of taking over the audio output that the oscillator 3 would otherwise be using, or certainly the triangle wave would certainly be using. And on the matrix itself, you can see it says oscillator 3 and sample and hold. So you can't have sample and hold values being generated and usable within the synth at the same time as the triangle wave of the oscillator number 3, which is a bit limiting. You've either got to choose, do I have LFO or do I have sample and hold? You can't have both. So as well as oscillator number 3 for LFO duties, we've got one single envelope generator. It's called a trapezoid because it's a slightly novel design. It's not a sort of like a standard ADSR. It's got these two controls here, which one's called on and one's called off, and they're basically controlling the time that the envelope generator is in active mode, generating an envelope, or in sort of passive mode, not generating an envelope. And the reason they're there is because the envelope generator is loopable, which is in itself, you know, it's not a rare thing to find loopable envelope generators, but to have these two time controls is quite interesting. So if I crank up the off time here, you'll see it's spending most of its time off, and the time that it's on is much shorter. Whereas if I crank up the on, you'll see that it's on all the time and hardly off at all. You get the idea. This is in sort of loopable mode that we're watching it right now. If I crank this all the way up round to maximum, now the envelope generator behaves like a regular envelope generator. You have to trigger it with a gate. It's not loopable anymore. So we've got the trapezoid envelope generator, but we just have one of them. Now this envelope generator does actually have directly inside it a voltage controlled amplifier. And the reason I guess it has it inside it is to kind of save on sort of patch points that are used up in the matrix, and we'll talk about the matrix a little bit later on. So when you set up an envelope generator here, it's directly in a hardwired way affecting this amplifier. So you can route audio into the envelope generator, and you're actually routing it into the VCA. The envelope generator is controlling that VCA's amplitude, and then you can get a level out of the VCA, which is actually manually controllable here by this signal potentiometer down here. So it's actually an envelope generator and amplifier sort of like tightly welded together. So let's face it, it's the matrix that's the heart of this synthesizer. In fact, it's the tricks in matrix that gives the Syntrx its name. It's actually demonstrations in videos of the matrix that sold me this synth rather than the sounds that were being created with it. It's such a powerful feature, but let's face it, we've seen it before. Just take a look at the Arturia Matrix Brute and now the Poly Brute as examples. You know, the power of this matrix is that you can patch anything to anything. You can patch an output to as many inputs as you want. And of course, there are no cables. But it's not all as wonderful as it first seems with this matrix. The first thing that you realize is that when you connect an output to an input, you've only got 3 sort of intensity values that connection can be. It can either be fully connected 100%, or it can be at 60% or 30%. You don't have a potentiometer, you don't have any dial control to control the amount of that connection from an output to an input. You have just 3 values. And that actually is really quite limiting, and it's because it's limiting that you'll find that there are potentiometers littered all over the front panel of the synth. To get around that limitation, you've got potentiometers that will control the level of the CV output from the envelope generator. You've got a potentiometer that will control the level of VCO number 3 when you use it as an LFO, for example. You've got level controls, potentiometers to control the audio level outputs from the oscillators. So, you know, you're having to have those potentiometers as well as the matrix, and that becomes an issue when it comes to saving and recalling patches, and I will talk about that in a little while. More limitations with the matrix. Now it's a 16 by 16 matrix, so we have 16 outputs and 16 inputs, and that sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, especially when a single output can be routed to all of the 16 inputs if you want to. That's an awful lot of patching that you can do, but you have to realize that this matrix is not just a modulation matrix, it's a complete routing matrix for the synth as a whole. You use it to route the audio signal path through the synthesizer to the outputs from the oscillators. And that sounds like a really, really cool thing, because the whole control of the whole synthesizer is in this one matrix, but it does mean that those precious 16 by 16 slots are actually taken up for things that you might take for granted. For example, you have to use up rows and columns in this matrix so that you can route audio from your oscillators into, say, the filter. The filter takes up a column. Then from the filter you want an output from the filter, which is a row, so that you can pass that audio on to the VCA, the amplifier that's inside the envelope generator. So that's another routing that you have to do. Then from the envelope generator to pass that audio into, say, the reverb unit. That takes up another column and a row in the matrix for you to be able to do that. And then from the reverb, you want to then pass it to the output channels. So these are all eating up rows and columns, and although it's great to have all of this capability and flexibility of how you route audio, as well as using CV for modulations in this one matrix, it actually means that from a modulation point of view, from patching it to modulate the synthesizer, you don't have very many patch inputs and outputs. Half of the inputs are audio inputs, and only half of them are CV inputs, and less than half of the outputs are CV outputs. And this does create limitations. There is no ability to, for example, modulate the resonance of the filter. All of the envelope generator parameters, apart from decay, cannot be modulated. What else? You can't get at the waveforms, the individual waveforms of VCOs 1 and 2. You can get at the individual waveforms of VCO number 3, but if you're using the sample and hold circuit, then that takes up one of those rows. So that means you can't be accessing the triangle wave of the LFO as well as the sample and hold random value outputs at the same time. There are many of these limitations that are enforced upon you because, you know, the matrix is only 16 by 16 and it's a dual purpose thing. It's audio and CV together, and I appreciate that, you know, a lot of the power is not just control voltage patching, but it's also audio patching for frequency modulation, for example. But you don't have very many inputs and outputs when you actually get down to it and start patching it. There'll be things that you want to do with the synth that you just can't do. So if I can summarize my feelings on this matrix, you know, as much as it gives you power and flexibility, because that's what it's there for, it actually highlights to me what could be possible but isn't possible, if that makes sense. And I'll give you an example, and that is patch recall and saving. So this matrix not only allows you to route outputs to inputs at varying intensities, but you can save all that as a patch using the matrix, very, very similar to how you can save using Arturia, Matrix Brute and Polybrute. But what is the actual benefit of saving that patch? Because unfortunately, on this synthesizer, you don't save the whole patch. You just save the routings that you've created in that matrix and nothing more. And the problem is you're relying on all of the potentiometers and the switches around the synthesizer to create your sounds. Just saving those routings is really not particularly helpful because, in my experience from using it just for a few hours, it's very easy to recreate a patch, especially with this wonderful little Etch-a-Sketch style of sort of like navigating around that they provided here. You just navigate around, press a button, and the job is done. It's very easy to plug in a patch. You know, oh, that row to that column 30%, that row to that column 60%, that row to that column 100%. It's very simple to do that. But what is actually incredibly difficult is to recreate a patch by getting those potentiometers in exactly the right places to get the sound that you had before. That's almost impossible. And actually, these wonderful, gorgeous looking geared potentiometers that you have on those VCOs, there's quite a bit of room for error in those. They're not as precise as they look. As I've been recording the various segments of this video, I have been kind of mindful that I might be sounding a bit critical, a bit hard in my comments. But personally, I don't think so, because at the end of the day, I'm going to be more critical about a very expensive piece of equipment than I am about a cheap piece of equipment, and I think that's kind of human nature. You know, if you were going out to a showroom to buy an expensive sports car, you'd be very critical about the tiniest blemish on the bodywork, wouldn't you? Well, you're not going to be that critical if it's a cheap run-around car. I mean, at the end of the day, it's kind of human nature. And you know, when I look at this synth, it is a monosynth. You have to remind yourself, it's just a monosynth. You can play it duophonically, but it's a monosynth. It's £2,700 here in the UK. That's a heck of a lot of money to pay for a monosynth. If it's a monosynth that has got incredible power and incredible flexibility, then okay. But as I've been saying in this video, as much as this matrix here gives you flexibility and does give you power, it kind of highlights to me the things that are missing and the kind of the missed opportunities that are there. And if I talk about a few of the other missed opportunities that I think are really there with this synthesizer, I think it's a missed opportunity that, for example, we don't have stereo filter capability. You know, this synth has got stereo. It's great that it's got those two channels. But we've got just the one monophonic low-pass filter, and then we've got sort of like two let's just call them tone controls on the outputs to the channels. Why didn't they just give us a stereo low pass filter, or basically two low pass filters that you can offset the cutoffs with? Why didn't they give us that? Because then we would be able to modulate those, and it would be far more useful. I'm thinking of like the Moog Matriarch and what they did with that, how they implemented the filter there. A really brilliant way that they implemented the filter. So I think that's a missed opportunity here. I think the whole patch saving and recalling of the whole state of the synth, that is the biggest missed opportunity. It would make such a huge difference to me if you could do that. Absolutely, I think that's a missed opportunity. And also, while we're talking about the Matrix here, you know, it's got potential to be just such an amazing standalone synth. You've got these speakers here. They're really quite powerful speakers. Unusable because of the reverb feedback, in my opinion. But it could be an amazing standalone instrument. But you can just make drones with it, or else you're going to have to hook it up to a keyboard or a sequencer. Why didn't they put a sequencer in here? Just with, you know, with some extra firmware, implement some kind of sequencer in this matrix the way that Arturia have done so. That would be so amazing. I think that's a big missed opportunity as well. Forgetting about the negatives, the positives. The positives are the sound that you can get from this, and the whole way of working for me, just working in this matrix, the Etch-a-Sketch matrix. It's so fantastic. It puts a smile on my face to do it. Just everything there in one place. You can see where everything is rooted, audio and CVs. You can see everything at a glance, what's going on there. It's a brilliant way of working. I think it's kind of the future. I'd love to see this implemented in a more fully featured way in another synthesizer. I do love that, and I love the sound. I love the sound. I love the grungy, gritty kind of sounds. There's a GeoSynth video. It's an interview of Ty Unwin, and he talks in that interview about synthesizers having a palette of colors, you know, and all those colors together give him the opportunities to create music and create sounds from those synthesizers. And for me personally, this Syntrx has a particular palette of colors which are not replicated in the other hardware synths that I have, and for that reason I would really like to keep it, but it's a question of justifying the money. So that's it. That's all I have time for in this video. I'm still undecided about whether I'm going to get a replacement or get my money back. I don't know. I'm going to have to sleep on it, think about it. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your patience to get to the end with me here. I really do hope you enjoyed this video, and until the next one, as always, thank you very much for watching.